If you're leading a commercial stage medtech company trying to break through that next growth milestone or wanting to get your organization acquisition ready, this episode is for you. Brian Carlisle has sat on every side of the medtech deal table: operator, sales leader, CEO, board member, FINRA licensed M&A advisor. Now he runs Carlisle Strategic Partners, where he helps early and growth stage medtech companies raise capital, accelerate commercial growth, and prepare for exit. So in this episode, Brian breaks down the exact sales methodology he deployed to double profitability and achieve massive growth at multiple companies, and why your sales process needs to mirror your customer's buying process, why most medtech companies are managing their 1099 distributors wrong, and the simple shifts that make them perform like direct reps, his proprietary scorecard framework for diagnosing what's broken in your commercial engine and identifying quick wins, why you should never put valuations in your ask slide and what to say when investors push back on that, and finally, the brutal math on Series A deals right now and how to think about medtech capital in 2026. This one is packed with stuff you're not going to find in press releases, you're not going to find on LinkedIn. I know you're going to love it, so let's get into it. Mr. Brian Carlisle, I am so excited to have you on the pod. I know this is going to be a good discussion. Anytime we can get people that have both like kind of commercial sales experience, but as well as like capital experience, I think it's like a very fun and interesting convo. So I'm just excited for you to join the pod. Where does this pod find you today? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, I'm at my office just outside of Philadelphia.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Eagles had a good year, I think. I'm a big Saquon fan.
Yeah, well, I went to Penn State, so I'm a big Saquon fan as well.
Yeah.
Would love to see him get back to 2024 form next year. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know Brian's a managing partner and founder of Carlisle Strategic Partners. So it's a firm that helps early stage and growth stage healthcare companies, clean energy companies, et cetera, raise capital, navigate M&A transactions. Before you launched CSP, you were the CEO of NovaBone, right?
Correct.
Regenerative medicine company, spent years at Integra Life Sciences, running sales programs, Permapure, sales and marketing, VP of sales and marketing roles. You said you went to Penn State, got your MBA there, BS from Townsend, and then you basically sat on every side of the medtech deal table, right? Like operator, seller, advisor, board member. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sum it up. It's been a really fun career and learning journey. You know, as an operator, really only worked at 3 different companies, but was able to enjoy a variety of different roles there. You know, being a commercial leader at heart, somebody, told me at one point you should get experience in multiple functions. So I spent about 4 years in operations, which is tough for a commercial person at heart. You kind of feel like a caged animal, but you just learn so much there. And I've had the pleasure of having some great mentors and some great teachers along the way.
Yeah, that's awesome. The caged bird thing, that's pretty funny. Yeah, it's tough to feel like that, but if you know that the time is limited and you're doing this to learn, et cetera, like there's probably, you can like kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. You're not like, how am I going to get out of this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And it was a developmental role at Integra that I was in, and I was doing the program at Penn State at the same time. And the great part about it was they were giving me some of the most important projects across the division that I was in, which was, transformational from a learning perspective, but being able to do that while I was going through the executive MBA program at Penn State. I basically take these projects at work and I take them to the classroom on the weekend. I bring those lessons from the classroom on the weekend and bring them to work during the week. And it was just a phenomenal opportunity for me to leverage both of those things at the same time. From a life standpoint, that's a lot to do, to go to school on the weekends for 2 straight years. But, you kind of take a leap of faith and say, hey, I think this is going to work out. I've talked to people I know and trust that, have confidence in the plan that I've developed as well. And, life has a funny way of working out. But yeah, I'm extremely grateful for those opportunities.
Yeah. No, it really does. When you're just working hard and busting ass, like it's incredible how things just seem to work out a lot of times. So you went from, running sales programs at Integra, leading Permapure's commercial team, CEO of NovaBone, and now you're kind of advising on deals. And you're FINRA licensed, correct? You've got like, I think it's
correct
80 something and you're 60 something.
Yeah, you have to do the now with FINRA now. It's the SIE, Security Industry Essentials. You have to do that first. then 63, which is the state regulatory exam, and then I did 82, which is what gets you your registration as a registered representative. There's a couple of different ways to do it. It was a lot to navigate, quite frankly, but I did 63 and 82.
Yeah, that's awesome. And those tests aren't easy. I was living with a guy when he was taking his like series, I think series 7, back in the day. It was it was fun. But anyways, I just laid that out, kind of on the front end here of the pod, just to say like, that may be not like a pure straight line in terms of like, career trajectory. Maybe some people view it as, maybe you view it as, but like it's I would say a little bit unique, if not accelerated in some fashion. So like, what was, kind of that evolution of you, especially that jump from like Permapure to like the CEO of NovaBone, right? And then so on, like just walk the audience through, if you could, just like, what were the kind of levers of those transitions happening? Were these things that were serendipitous at some degree, or you were really driving for that specific role or those specific responsibilities, CEO titles, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great question, Spencer. I mean, I think for me, and this is just my nature, from the jump, I was driving pretty hard at something. Sometimes there was a very specific target that I was working towards. Sometimes it was just excelling in my current role and having faith that it would lead to the next role. I was always very active along the way of, like I said, really developing that bench of mentors, because, I got into the industry at 22 working for Biomed Orthopedics. So I was very lucky to get in right out of undergrad. You don't realize that when you're 22, but I was very lucky to do that. And I was always the youngest person on my team by like 10 years. And so I was used to that. But I also knew that, I didn't have that experience. I might have talent, but I didn't have experience, and both are helpful.
Yeah.
So I developed a bench of mentors to help guide me in certain directions. And sometimes they give you feedback and advice that you don't love hearing, like, hey, Brian, you should go spend a few years in operations. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound fun.
Yeah.
I like to be outside. I like to be with the customers. And I'd say, in terms of, big levers, I mean, making the decision to go back and get an MBA. I think some people have asked me now, like, hey, do you think I'll need that to get to X in my career? And I always push back. And with the decision I made was, well, it may not help me get any further in my career, but I know that I'm going to learn things that I'm going to develop in ways that I won't if I don't do it. Right.
Yeah.
So I kind of came to the mindset of, it doesn't matter about where it gets me, but it matters about what I learn. And I really wanted to get stronger on the finance side. And I'm able to do things now that I would never be able to do if I didn't get my MBA. So that was definitely one. The 4 years in operations was another. And I just had some phenomenal mentors at Integra. I'll leave their names off, but if they're listening, they know who they are for sure. And then from there, I actually went to Halma. So Halma's a public company on the London Stock Exchange, and they're more of like a holding company, like a Berkshire Hathaway. Permapure was one of their healthcare companies. I was an officer at the age of 35, and I led, I was on the board of directors. I led sales and marketing, and that was a great time. We took, single digit EBITDA company and had explosive growth, over a 2-year period. When Halma acquired NovaBone, they quickly put me on the board of directors, and then I succeeded the founder when he retired. So, the thing I'll share is, for people that are listening, especially if they're younger in their careers, is there will be times where you're like, hey, this is taking longer than I thought. I thought I'd be further than I am now at 30 or 35 or whatever. And there are times that I had that as well. And then I find myself as a CEO in my mid 30s, and I'm like, well, I didn't plan on that happening that quickly. But life has an interesting way of working out. And that's where I think, having faith that you're doing the right things and being steadfast in the things that you're working on to develop personally and professionally, those are the key things. And then, I think life has a funny way of working out. When you do things the right way, you treat people the right way, you act with character and integrity and all of those things that we talk about in our corporate values, but those show up in how you treat people.
Yeah.
And when you develop that reputation and that network, then these kind of things, transpire at times.
Yeah. And I just 2 things I want to kind of double tap on there. One is like on the MBA piece, like I honestly have mixed feelings about the MBA piece, because like I think for certain career paths, or like if you have certain goals or whatever, it's like insanely valuable. And I think too, like what you learn is definitely a big piece of that, but also the people you meet along the way, because like I know a lot of like the Wharton MBA, or like, I know someone that went to like Wisconsin MBA because they're like in banking and finance, right? So like I think like being strategic, I think like just going to like any random, like online and getting an MBA, I'm like, that's not really to me the point of an MBA, And
Yeah.
and again, I don't have one. I could be missing it, but like especially like if you're trying to broaden your network, there's a specific program that has like some gravitas to it around the industry or kind of the focus that you want. Like in those situations, I think it's like really awesome. And especially too, like sometimes employers will pay for it. And so like when you have those opportunities, take them, right?
Yeah.
The second thing I wanted to mention too, though, is around the mentors piece, because this is something that I see, like I was the same way. Like I went through a bunch of accelerators, I came up from a clinical background. I was direct patient care nursing. So like, I didn't really have mentors in that, in that way. To a degree in the hospital, you have kind of people that are, helping guide you, especially early in your career. But like once I got into the kind of device world and we're doing these accelerators, I really like latched on to, those mentors and tried to be a sponge and learn from them. But like, I think that's one thing that I think is kind of a, waning skill set of a lot of like the earlier stage operators. And I would say earlier stage as like a venture status, not even like an age thing, because I've seen like I've seen young people be good and bad at this. I've seen middle-aged or older founders and stuff be great and horrible at this. But like that, like, being coachable, understanding like what the nature of a mentor relationship needs to look like in the makeup. Like you don't need to just like constantly go and just like pitch them ideas or go ask them for things. Like you're asking questions to them. You're not asking things of them constantly. And then whenever the time is right and you need a referral or a recommendation or something, right? Like you've kept your dry powder, you invested in them and tried to, inquire more than you advocated in all of those situations so you can like extract the knowledge, right? That's the whole point of mentorship. Like I don't know if you've seen that, but it feels like every, I'll have people where I'm like, I would be a great mentor for them, like in my mind, right? And we'll get on a call and they're like, hey, do you have any fundraising intros you can make? Okay. Like, hey, will you look at this deck for me? Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
This is not mentorship. Like, I don't know if you're trying,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? I don't know if you've seen that as well, but
Every now and then, I mean, people that like, they're not really looking for a mentor. They're looking for somebody to do work for them, basically. And like, hey, I've got this issue. Can you make this easier for me?
yeah,
That's not what it's about. I mean, I think, in a good mentorship relationship, if you're the mentee, then number one, you need to develop trust and credibility with that person. If they're gonna lend you their time and expertise and genuine, hospitality, build trust and credibility first. And that's how I got folks to help me. And again, like some of the mentors that I mentioned, like that I developed at Integra. I mean, I was in my 20s when I started working there. So, I've got people with, multiple decades of experience over me. No question who the mentee was in these relationships.
yeah.
I had C-suite individuals, mentoring me. And, I just came to them genuinely. I'm like, hey, listen, and this was after we got to know each other. Here's, what I'm working on. Here's what I think this will lead to. What are your thoughts? What am I missing? How should I think about this differently, perhaps? And I gave the example before of like, from a career perspective, like somebody who's like, you really need to go spend time in operations. You can be a CEO if you only grow up in commercial. Like we've seen those people happen, but you'll be a better CEO if you've done time in both, functions. It doesn't have to be operations. It could be, supply chain. It could be, pick one up, manufacturing. It could be a variety of different things. But yeah, so, and for me now, I try to give it back as much as I can. Before we jumped on, I mentioned that, the Fellows Innovation Program at Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
I spent some time with them from the Penn State College of Medicine within the last week, just giving them some feedback on, things to think about when they're trying to commercialize their technology that they're developing at Penn State and bringing it to market. I love giving that back whenever I can because there's so many people that invested in me. But yeah, obviously you want that healthy relationship, right? And if you're, for anybody younger that's listening, if they're looking to develop mentors, one of the ways that not just with in mentorship relationships, but some of my colleagues now that I work with will tell you, I finish every conversation with, before I let you run, is there anything on your list that I can help you with?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so one of my colleagues will tell you that, he laughs now when I say that because I say it every time, but it can't just be about you, right? There's got to be a reciprocal relationship here and you got to be looking to give back and add value.
Yep. 100%. So I want to ask about some of kind of commercial sales, things that you're seeing in the market, how things have changed. So like, whether it was Integra, Permapure, NovaBone, like took things through some big milestones, FDA clearances, new product launches, kind of the works, and so like, I guess from your time across those organizations in those commercial kind of operational roles, overseeing the sales process, as you're kind of moved into the advisory role, and then now you're helping a lot of these like clients grow and things like that. Like, are there any kind of seismic shifts or kind of trends over time that have either grown or waned or waxed or waned, et cetera, that are impacting the sales environment? And I'm thinking from the perspective like, you're either 18 months or 12 months from a product launch, or you're 6 months into a product launch, maybe a year and a half. Like, what are the things that you think people should really be aware of that's like, this is a evolving and changing thing from a sales and commercial perspective, selling into hospitals, selling to surgeons, selling into ambulatory surgery centers, that kind of thing?
Yeah, the biggest one, and I hope this answers your question, Spencer, because it might hit the nail slightly askew. But the biggest lesson I learned was actually leading a project at Integra, and we deployed a customized sales process and methodology across a division of 4 channels, direct and indirect. It was sub 1 billion, but it was certainly north of 500 million. So it was a substantial project. And the main thing that I see today that we weren't doing at this point at Integra, we had substantial results after deploying this at Integra, and then I did it at both of my Hallmark companies with exceptional results as well. And it's a simple process of understanding that your customers have their own buying process and the steps they go through, and that your sales process should mirror their buying process. And from there, you can imagine we build out this commercial ecosystem that leads to steps of your sales process based on steps of their buying process. And based on those steps, we actually correlate that to a sales funnel. And we now have a process that we can verify based on the customer action commitments exactly where we are in our funnel, so that we can actually predict and forecast more accurately. Our headline with all of this stuff that I did at both companies was, we need to become predictable and accurate in what is a very competitive and complex sales environment. And by complex, I mean, you have competition involved in the deal. You have multiple buying influences involved in the decision making, and it's deeper than just saying, "Hey, here's my sales process. Oh yeah, I've got a pipeline. It's in the CRM, and here it is." And I've seen a bunch of them in diligence. And you go through, and sometimes they're good, and you'll have people that have some good basis there, but there's a lot of garbage out there, because this concept that I'm sharing now is not well understood or internalized.
Yeah.
And the companies that do it really well are far more successful. We had immediate results within the first couple of months at Integra. We doubled our profitability at Permapure within the first 2 years, leveraging some of these things. And so there's more to it than that, but that was one of the big ones, is getting to a sales process and methodology so that your business can be predictable and accurate, and begin to accelerate growth. Because what happens is, you always have that top 20% that's very good, and you have the bottom 20 that is not very good sometimes, and then you have the middle. When you've got a process and everybody's trained on the exact same process, everybody speaks the same language, from the sales team up to the executive leadership, and the middle 60 now gets a lot more effective because they got a roadmap that they can follow.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, your top 20 can figure it out on their own. The middle 60 might not be able to, but now that you've made them more efficient, now you've got a fully functioning commercial engine.
Yeah, I want to dive deeper on a lot of the sales and commercial operation stuff. So when it comes to, whether it's you, your sales reps, kind of you're guiding them to help you extract this information, or maybe you at kind of like the sales management level is getting and extracting this information. When you mentioned making sure that your sales process mirrors their buying process, right? Like, mirroring their buying process, like, are you seeing that as specific to systems or IDNs, individual care locations, or is it like how are you extracting that? Like, kind of how are you quantifying it?
Great question. So every company, even though Medtech, the home health call point will have a different buying process versus the orthopedic, company selling surgically implanted devices, focused on hospitals and IDNs. So it'll depend on your business who you're specifically selling to and what that buying process looks like.
Right.
But to your point, the times that I've done it, these are surgically implanted devices. The first company I did it, the second company was not surgically implanted devices. They were still class 2 devices, but we were selling a unique component technology to other OEMs. So we had a different buying process
Yeah.
there. The way we did it was we actually went out, we took our best people from the different channels and we sent them out. We gave them a questionnaire and they went out and they interviewed, I think, 8 different types of buying influences, right? And so we mapped out what these are. Like, some might be a user buying influence, like a surgeon. Some might be an economic buyer, like the head of supply chain or the head of finance or something like that. So we didn't just email the charge nurse or the surgeon. We interviewed a variety of different folks within these call points to get a collective lens of what that buying process looks like. And then if you can imagine, 16 of your best people, and they've got interview forms from 8 different interviews they did with a mix of different buying influences. And we spent a week in a hotel, a conference room, mapping out what the steps of the buying process is. And from there, we figured out, okay, if these are the 9 steps of the buying process, whatever it is, what should the corresponding steps be of our sales process? If this is the step of the sales process, what are the seller actions that are included here? And then what do we need to confirm from our customer to know that we've moved to the next step?
Mm-hmm.
And so it all sounds very regimented. Again, the top 20%, they can do this from gut feel because they're just good at it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can institutionalize this, now you've got an entire, sales team that's now really effective.
Yeah. And it reminds me, like, I talk a lot about like productizing offerings, productizing, especially with like service people, like consultants or whatever, just like trying to productize it as much as possible to make it repeatable and make it efficient. And I think this is kind of like reminding me of that. I do want to talk through, one of the previous conversations we had, it was kind of illustrative to me talking through, when you're early stage, right, unless you're doing some like big mega round, which is like way more common these days, but you typically will have to start, you can't afford a bunch of W-2 sales reps. Like you can't afford that, right? So you've got to start with, predominantly 1099s, distributor groups, right? And these come in different shapes and sizes, whether you've got, urology or GYN or general surgery focus versus like orthopedic groups that may be like way more hyper specialized, maybe even that all they do is spine. So you've got those 1099 groups, and then there's an evolution over time where you do want to start adding your own W-2 reps, and maybe they're kind of, BDRs that are helping manage some groups and they're working their own territories. And obviously, a lot of the big companies will have basically fully W-2 sales forces because they've got the cash flow to do it, et cetera, et cetera. You talk through that evolution, starting with that, you're in the first 2 years of launch, and you are predominantly, a, independent distributor, 1099 sales force. Like walk me through, maybe just a punch list, top 3, top 4, whatever, of like, these are the kind of keys to management and success when you've got that type of sales organization.
As we're diving into this, a great question, Spencer. And there's a lot of companies in this stage, good companies, good technology, and you're trying to get to market and scale with the resources that you have, especially if it's in the past couple of years with a difficult capital environment. A lot of companies would have liked to have raised 10, 20 million and added some more direct, team members, but they couldn't afford it. The one thing that I'll say is there are a lot of really, really talented independent reps and distributor groups out there. I worked for one in the first 3 years of my career with Biomed Orthopedics. And the number one lesson I learned as an operator is, these aren't people that, you just contract and you send them a commission check and they're going to do what you need them to do. They're treated that way a lot, which is extremely ineffective. The one key principle that I always remembered is if you want these people to devote their time and energy to your company, of course they're going to get paid for it, but so they're going to get paid for all the other products they carry as well. The number one thing I did was I would get in their territory with them, and I'd ride shotgun with them, and I'd spend time building trust and credibility with them. What are the things that you guys need to be successful? What are some of the challenges that you're coming up against in your territory? How can we help you win? If you build trust, if you take the time to build trust and credibility and establish those personal relationships, there's no reason it can't function very similarly to a direct rep at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so again, a direct rep, technically, in a company, you have more leverage over that direct rep. But if you've managed the relationship appropriately, there's no reason you can't have an effective relationship with your indirect. So, and I think that's number one. The second thing that I see a lot with distributors and indirect channel structures is they establish the contract, and it'll be a lot of legalese, which is fine. I know you need that. If you lose your inventory, you're
Yeah.
accountable. I hope that's in there. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
But here's your commission rate. You get, and sometimes in orthopedics, they're very, very high commission rates. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of your margin walking right out the door. Maybe it makes sense in some instances, but they seem to be blanket, rates that are thrown out there. What I think is the right way to do it is treat your indirects just like your directs, right? They all get their comp plan, so they know how they're paid, but they all get a quota, so they know what they're being measured against. But then also show them what are their incentives for when they achieve beyond quota. How can they make more money? And so, and how do we reward them, outside of just, monetary things when they do that? And when you're having your team calls, if you have a hybrid channel, you have to include these guys, right? So I've always tried to treat them just like I've treated my direct reps. And the one thing that I see that is a major fallacy is, most, small to mid-sized med tech companies I see, their indirect reps do not have a target. They do not have any benefit for achieving beyond plan because they don't have a target anyways.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of doing what they do, and the company just kind of gets this passive result. And that's not a good thing for the shareholder at the end of the day.
No, it's not. It's not. Yeah, and I really like your perspective on, the 1099s, and it's kind of, independent distributors, and it's kind of changed my view of it. Like, in the sense that like they can be just as effective as a W-2. It just takes a little bit more, kind of nuance and attention to detail, showing up in person, building the trust and credibility. One thing I think every company kind of goes through this where they're like, okay, great. Like maybe you find a group or you find some distributor groups and you start to work and maybe you get these agreements in place and you're getting ready for the launch. And then it's like, we talked about showing up, being on site, right? I think two of the big things that, I think a lot of companies will just like, they kind of just do on the fly because it's like, oh, it's time to do this. We have to do this, is like, what do we arm these, distributor reps with, right? Like, is it 4 brochures and then, a couple links and then some sample product and, maybe it's a surgeon evaluation form and, like what's kind of the package in your mind? And I know it's obviously unique for every company, but like in broad strokes, like what do you think the right kind of package of assets and collateral is for them? And then what do you view as the optimal communications cadence? So like not the in-person, right? You do that kind of when you can.
Yeah.
Obviously more is better on that in-person stuff, but like that either phone call or, video meeting, what's the right cadence for that on a monthly basis?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the communication one first. I mean, whatever my, communication was. So as a commercial leader, I typically had biweekly one-on-ones with all of my team members, right? And so if I was leading directors that leaded reps, I still had biweekly one-on-ones with them. Even when I was early in my career as a regional manager, biweekly one-on-ones with each of my reps where we'd spend an hour walking through everything in their territory. And it was through a lens of how are things going? How can I help you? And again, it's trust and credibility always, right? Because that's how they're open with you. They'll share what they're struggling with and they'll ask you for help. If you're constantly just beating down on them, they're not going to, these calls are going to be very difficult. They're going to be very one way. You're not going to get much context out of them. But I always worked on building that relationship. And I think at the end of the day, that's how you get team members that are willing to go the extra mile for you at the end of the quarter when they might already be 20% over quota. And it's Friday, the last day of the quarter, they got a tea time at noon, but you can call them. And because you got the relationship, they'll go make that extra call for you so that the team can hit their number for the quarter, things like that. So I've done the same thing with indirects, right? And it's different. So it depends on the distributor. You might have a distributor that's a one-person group, or it's only a couple of people. You might have a distributor that's 40 people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to figure out within that group, what is the right way to do it? A lot of times they'll have a point person for different product lines or companies that they carry, and that's who your primary line of communication will be with. There might also be specialized reps underneath there that focus purely on your technology. If that's the case, you're going to want to have a touch point with them. Just making sure that you're also being mindful of the chain of command within the distributorship. But I think the common principle is regular and frequent communication that goes both ways. How can I help you? What are things that you need from me to be successful? But also, how are things going? What's the number for this quarter? How are you tracking to that number? It's okay to have those questions because everybody is accountable for delivering results at the end of the day. So that's how I've always handled the communication process. And again, I think when you invest the time in the relationship, they don't mind picking up the call and having that discussion.
Yeah. And before you jump on to the kind of asset collateral package piece of this, on the communications piece, what I've seen, the people that are managing, like responsible for managing these independent distributor reps, right? And it may be like, you have, two people, or maybe it's even just one person, but one or two people that are doing the sales management. And sometimes this is like from the executive layer, the C-suite layer, whatever. But like when you have like a commitment, like a really well thought out strategy, like you said, mirroring their sales plans, the targeting, which we'll talk about here in a bit, like who should they should be going after. When you have a really well thought out strategic plan, and you put it in place early and you stick to that and you just keep executing on it, it works so much better. I've seen a lot of like organizations where like it seems like every 6 weeks they're like, okay, we have to focus on this now. Okay, the messaging has to be this now. Or like we need more, we're switching the marketing collateral on this because we're focusing on this other thing. And it's kind of this like whiplash, and it muddies the message. It's less clear. It's because this dictate comes down, and then we have to figure out how we do this, and then we have to communicate that to everybody and maybe get them new stuff. But it also just takes up kind of time and mental bandwidth on the layer that is doing the management. So like they may spend all of a sudden 25% of their time figuring out how to do this change in XYZ, instead of spending that time just religiously executing on this flow of like my in-person meetings and my constant communication. It's bi-directional and we're building trust and whatever. And I think reps can feel that when there's just like this kind of whiplash of like direction and focus and messaging. And it kind of, I think turns them off a little bit, because it's like, man, these people are just like, every other time I talk to them, there's some new, shiny, strategy object that they're wanting us to chase down. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that before you talk about the collateral piece, but
yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned it, because I always call it this shiny object syndrome. And it's, think about like one of your best reps, over exceeding on their numbers, just, you can always depend on them to deliver. And then, the company's like, hey, we're starting a campaign on this new product. We want to push all this product. And we're like, hey, your best rep over here has very little sales in this new product. And it's like, well, but they're generating a lot of growth and profit for the company. Should we take that into consideration?
Yeah.
And so where I've seen that manifest is in compensation plans, especially, right? Because this year, like, oh, we're going to start pushing this product category this year. And then next year, it's kind of like a different category they want to give attention to for whatever reason. Maybe the margin's always different on all these products. And I get that. But at the end of the day, they're all company dollars, right? And so if you want to dilute the focus and frustrate your sales team, give them a complicated comp plan.
Yeah.
And my barometer has always been, if your sales team cannot understand how much money they're making off of the job that they're doing while driving through inner city traffic, if they can't do the math in their mind driving through inner city traffic, then your plan's too complicated.
Yeah, I like that.
So I always simplified the heck out of my plans. There weren't different rates for different products. They had a target, and they made X amount for hitting that target. And when they hit over that target, they made more. Yeah. And by the way, we made it uncapped as well, right? So, and there's a way to do all of this. And I figured all this out the hard way. And in life, usually the easiest way is the simple way is the best way to do it. And I kind of found this structure for Medtech comp plans, especially. You can do it for direct and indirect. They're a little bit different, but you can simplify these plans to say, here's your target. When you hit this, you make X. When you overachieve, you're going to make X more. And it's uncapped, on a quarterly basis and annually.
Yep.
But yeah, the shiny object syndrome it's just annoying, right? And if it's a hard job, right? Like bug them on things that matter, right? Yeah. Bug them when you need that extra update on the forecast every day, the last week of the quarter. That those things matter, because maybe you're a public company and, reporting the forecast, up to the company and up to the street, those things matter, right? So think about like the things you're going to your team on, and leverage, that relationship that you built for the things that matter. I've never been a fan of the shiny object syndrome. I've always done an annual strategic planning process, and typically they are evolutions. There's not a brand new clean slate and a new plan every year. You're making tweaks every year. But once you get within the year, you've got your plan, you've got your key initiatives under all of your strategic pillars, and everybody's lockstep aligned with that strategy. The last thing I'll share on the strategy is, a lot of times in these companies, the strategy is only known at the board level.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge mistake.
Agreed.
I've always shared it with the entire team. If you were the janitor you knew what the strategy was, because I wanted everybody 100% lockstep aligned to what we were doing and why.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And if you know, on the collateral piece, I think with 1099, distributor groups, et cetera, like you do want to be cautious about overwhelming them in terms of like what they have to learn, right? Because you don't want them to just be like, open up the coat and there's 15 brochures and like, they don't really know any one of them, but like, right. So but also obviously you want more than like one thing for them to be able to like hand, right? So like, how do you think about the assets and the collateral, especially like out of the gate, kind of their onboarding package, if you will?
Yeah. So what I've done in the past is, I mean, in terms of like the collateral that the company has for the sales team in general, that's got to be a constant communication process with the team. What are you guys seeing? What do you need? How can we help you better communicate features and benefits? Now today, it's not just about clinical outcomes, it's about economics as well.
Yeah.
So how can we arm them with this information so they can communicate the clinical value proposition and the economic value proposition? So at a company, you're likely going to have a combination of, materials. In orthopedics, we have a lot of demos. We can show them how an implant works and things like that. But when it comes to actually deploying it, I've always gone to the team members, because here's the problem. And like any regional manager that has done a lot of field rides with their team can attest to this. All this stuff, I'd say 90% of it ends up in the garbage pail, which is known as your rep's trunk, right? And so it's crammed into it, and this stuff's expensive.
Yeah.
Like the brochures are expensive, and these are company dollars spent. And so what I started doing towards the end as an operator is I would go to my best people and say, "What do you need?" And they'd say, "I only want electronic stuff." And I'd say, "Great. Well, here we'll deliver it to you on the app. Here's how you can access it, and it's all electronic." And some might say, "Hey, I really like printed materials," and say, "Great, you give that them." But like honestly, like it can be such an area of waste that and again, it's what do you need to be successful? Some reps, and again, this is early in my career as a rep, I didn't leave behind brochures. Like I never sold with brochures.
Mm-hmm.
I would get an instrument tray and I would show them nuts and bolts. This is how it works. This is how the fixation is designed, so on and so forth. And it'd be the same tray we would use in surgery.
Yeah.
Obviously be clean, but I think everybody's got their own style, and you just have to help them, support them with that style. And so I think that's also the capital efficient way to do it. It drove me nuts when, and they'd be like, "Yeah, you guys keep mailing me all these brochures and I just throw them in the garbage." Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think any regional manager can attest to that. So with the independents as well, I would just go to them and say, "Hey guys, what do you need?" And if it's some like pie in the sky demo that's going to cost $10,000 to make, I'll be like, "Hey, like, can you live with this instead?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And you got to compromise, but I would always let them drive what they wanted.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. I think we would start with like maybe like 2 or 3 brochures in a trifold, obviously like sample product. And then we'd just have like a Dropbox, Google Drive folder, whatever, and it would just have links. It'd be like, here's this video link, that video link, whatever.
Yep.
And then we would be like, what are you hearing? And then we would be able to turn around brochures in like 2 to 3 weeks, and have them the digital versions immediately, and then get them printed, shipped out to them. But like, I think any more than that, it really can start to be overkill. Also expensive, right? When you're shipping out, okay, well, you need 10 per person, and you got how many people? I want to get on to like more what you're doing with Carlisle Strategic Partners, and then some kind of the market right now,
sure,
kind of the venture market side. But before we leave kind of the sales and commercial area, if you could just speak on targeting and focus with with the targets, because I think this is something that a lot of companies don't put enough thought or attention into, and they just think that like turn them loose, go sell in your territory, have fun.
Yeah. So, and again, like what the sales process and methodology that I've launched, like to me, you can tell from this podcast, this discussion, it's kind of like religion to me at this point.
Yeah.
But with this topic, we developed an ideal customer profile for each channel. And so we go through, and we it didn't come from management. It came from the best of the best, regional managers and reps. What are the 5 common characteristics of our best customers, right? And so this was really important from a targeting standpoint, right? Because then, again, think about your middle 60%. Hey guys, these are the characteristics you should be thinking about. It's not like as basic as orthopedic foot and ankle surgeon, go call on this guy. It would be more like specific of, we've got a relationship and we have access, right? And so they could think about it in a matter of context that was specific to them in their territory and how they think about their targets. But we'd have those usually 5 characteristics, which is helpful from a targeting standpoint, but also when they would go in their funnel and you've got like, one rep might have 50 deals in their funnel, and a lot of them can end up at the top there in the prospecting funnel. We would use that as a sorting mechanism then and say, and I would go through this with my team members and say, hey, if you've got, 20 plus deals in phase one of the funnel, I want you to go, and we can see them I'll start with this. You can see them in the CRM, and we'd force drag them 1 through 5. And so all the fives got attention first, and all the ones we may not have worked on at all.
Yeah.
And so that alone, if we can get to the deals that we have a higher probability of closing based on what we've seen in the past and focus our time and energy on those first, like, think about the impact that has on your sales cycle overall. It can be really impactful.
Yeah. And these days too, with, shout out to Alpha Sophia, but tools like that, you can say, okay, where do you have a relationship and access, and they're doing at least this much procedure volume. And like, maybe it's important to you that they're doing, alternate sites of care, right? Like they're operating, frequently at an ASC. And then maybe, of the systems in that area, like, that there are some that have, kind of dual source or kind of like more flat rate, right? Like we're just going to pay this for an implant and we can buy it from whoever, but it's fixed rate. You know what I'm saying? But like those types of granularity in the makeup. And like you said, like the time you spend focusing on the ones and like the people that are less of a good fit is just time that you're not spending on the fives, that people that are a great fit, right? So it's about kind of diluting your focus, like we said, previously. So talk to me about kind of the genesis for Carlisle Strategic Partners. Who is your ICP, right? And who are you working, like who do you want to work with? What do you want to help them achieve? Like kind of the broad strokes and guardrails for like what you do as an organization with them.
Yeah, great question, Spencer. And I'd say one quick thing on my background that we didn't talk about specifically was M&A. And at Integra and Halma, both highly acquisitive companies, so about a decade plus of buy-side M&A experience. I was usually on 2 to 4 deal teams a year. And that's, that deal experience is what kind of gave me that investor experience. And as I was starting this business, I realized that combination, that combined lens of investor and operator was unique. And so you could argue that now I'm purely on the financial side of the industry, which is true to an extent. But I leverage that background as an operator to select what I think are good companies with a lot of potential. They've got great technology and great management. Like those are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in my ideal customer or ideal client profile, I should say.
Yeah.
But my goal is to support them in a variety of things they might need help with, right? So I might have a client where I'm purely helping them scale on the commercial side of the business, and we can talk about it later, but I developed some tools so that they can be capital and time efficient for clients to make some impact. If you're a sub $50 million company, it's probably not conducive to, pay a Korn Ferry or a McKinsey, substantial dollars to come in and do some of these projects on the commercial side. So that's where I like to dive in with those smaller companies, because there's a need there that I think is unmet by the market, and you can really see the impact, quicker when you're doing it at that smaller scale. I'll also have clients that, on the biotech side, they might be pre-commercial, they might be in the clinic, and they need some guidance in preparing for exit and raising capital as they get there. And so that's kind of what led me to get that FINRA registration.
Yeah.
Most of my clients will have a need for capital at some point in their journey. Some may be getting closer to exit, and that's where we're helping. So there's always, if it kind of makes sense, there's always like an operational advisory component, and there's also a financial transaction component. So that's my client relationships vary a fair amount, because some might need more advisory, some might need more transaction report. So there's a little bit of a diversity there, but that's the goal, is to support them, where they need that, and provide return for their shareholders.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I want to ask in a second, I'm going to ask about like kind of the, proprietary framework that you put together, but like, I'm just curious, because I feel like you've seen, a lot of deal teams, and also on the venture side. So like if there's, if you could wave a magic wand and change, 1 or 2 things about, how capital flows in medtech. And so, fundraising processes could be VCs, how they evaluate companies, how strategic acquirers look at things, make decisions, how they think about big bets versus little bets. Like, what would you change? Magic wand, 1 or 2 things.
Wow, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I've seen is there's a big part of the challenge is from a capital standpoint is access, not just access to capital, but access to the relationships you need to potentially get an investment, particularly with institutional capital. And, it's the age old adage, people buy from who they trust, right? And people invest in who they trust. And so, if you're an operator with multiple prior exits, those groups that invested in you prior are gonna, be very quick to answer the phone when you're at your next role. I think it'd be
Mm-hmm.
great if it was easier for good companies and good operators to get the attention from the groups that could benefit from their
Yeah.
investment. But quite honestly, there's just so much noise because there's such a need for capital. And I don't blame anybody on the investment side. They're getting inundated
Yeah.
with requests, with decks. You can't look at all of it. I have a partnership with an asset management firm, and that's where my registration with FINRA is held. So when I go to some of these conferences, I'm registered as an investor,
Yeah.
and I will get 50 meeting requests within the first day. I can't even look at all of them.
Yeah.
So if there is a way to ease that and smooth that out a little bit, I think that'd be really helpful. Selfishly for us, on the financial side of the market, we have very strong relationships with a lot of these groups. And so our clients do get that attention. They do get a little bit of preferential treatment in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But, for me, the reason I got into this industry was I was very passionate about the products that were being developed and the impact that would have on patients at the end of the day. And I see a lot of great technology that's not getting the market because it doesn't get the capital that it's need, or it doesn't have the right management team to get it there. In a perfect world, all of the best technology would make it to market. I think that's just not reality.
Yeah, my last kind of final thought on this is like, I know that there are, large strategics that are making smaller bets, but I think even to them, the smaller bets may be like $20 million investments or something like that. And I wish there were, because it seems like there is just an absolute sea of incredible technologies that are raising less than $25 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it's just an absolute starved ecosystem right now for people writing, $1 to $4 million checks, frankly. I don't know what the answer is on that, but I feel like the strategics, I mean, like, they'll throw, I think, who was it that just bought some company for like 80 times, it was like a multiple something anyways, but they'll just throw billions. And I'm like,
Yeah.
like you could have like one of the most dynamic early stage funds and have a lot of small bets in place and put the right, arm's length distance joint venture type harnesses around it and like literally bolster the ecosystem with like one large strategic doing that. I feel like because of, there's these kind of markets with these oligopolies and it's like 8 companies control 80% of the market and,
Yep.
in different medtech verticals and stuff, spines like that, orthopedics like that, I'm like, it seems like it's harder and harder for a company that has one product to really make it as a one product company, right? Like you need a kind of suite of products. Like if you're in spine, like it's really hard if you just have one thing, right? You need cervical, you need thoracolumbar, you need fixation, you need, et cetera. And my thought on that was like, it would take the right creative type of capital and, kind of an operator management expertise, but like almost like mini SPACs where it's like, hey, like these 3-4 things by themselves are, clinically great, but commercially it would be hard. And then the capital strategy for each one of
Yep.
them may be, but being able to roll those together and also be able to kind of aggregate that talent and put that talent together and say, hey, look, like with these groups, we can have them doing, this function and this function. And I don't know that I've really seen that, happening. And these could be, recently post FDA. These could be kind of a mix of like, approaching
Yeah.
FDA. I would be like interested to see that because I think too, when you get, a lot of these teams will have very talented operators. And
Yep.
I don't know. I feel like combining them could be really interesting. And I think they would honestly, it would create like a more acquirable asset pack, right? That could be divvied
Yeah.
up if you needed to. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that, and then I'll ask you about the framework.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of things. One is, depending on how disruptive the technology is, and if it's like spine or one of these categories that's very condensed, the exit pathway typically is very clear that you're going to, get acquired by a strategic if the company exits. But if the company's got really attractive technology, you can usually place some bets on that happening for, hopefully what is a reasonable price to both sides.
Yeah.
But what you're also, and the roll ups happen, you just don't see as many of them. But really, that's the private equity model when you think about it. In a lot of these groups, I have a great relationship with Shore Capital Partners out of Chicago, thesis driven firm. And I've worked with them on a variety of theses where I've developed some of them where you'll develop a thesis, you find the platform, and then you build around it with they might be single technology products, and you put these things together, and there's substantial value creation by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I love things like that. I'm working on a couple of things like that in the background. I can't
Love
talk
it.
about it yet, but with my background, I was just sharing this with my wife this morning. You have operators in certain segments. I can't do this in cardiac, but in orthopedics, regenerative medicine, these areas, I can, with my background, I can see around the corners and see the opportunity with some things. And it's exciting to work on things like that, right? I mean, there's substantial value creation, which is great for everybody involved, right?
Yeah.
And even the deals that I'm not involved in, when I see those happen, sometimes it'll be a founder that I know that got a deal done and had a huge exit, and I love that phone call to hear how it impacted them and their family. But you're right, and that's why we talked about it before we jumped on. I mean, having the IPO market open is important. The single technology products, I think, very, very rarely would that make sense in the IPO market, but having that side of the market open frees up liquidity for a lot of other investors so they can do these smaller deals.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about the framework. I know you walked through it with me a bit, but kind of like, what's kind of the broad makeup of the framework? What types of organizations, like, is it most valuable to, and how do you deploy it? How do you use it?
Yeah, great question. And hot off the presses, I'm in the process of developing a second one. So there are two. One is a scorecard designed for growth acceleration. So think of companies, under 20 million of EBITDA, typically under 100 million of revenue. It does two things. One is it helps them understand in their commercial organization what needs to be fixed and where to focus. Some of these things might be near-term things. Some of these things you might need the budget for year one and beyond. And I know from being in those boardrooms, it can be ambiguous at times to the board of like, hey, we know something's not right in our commercial organization. We feel like we don't have a good funnel. But then they just say funnel. They don't really understand the nuance beneath it, like we just talked about.
Yeah.
So it helps them understand what needs to be fixed and where to focus. But I also take the time in not just delivering them the results of the scorecard, but giving them an implementation plan so they can identify some quick wins they can act on in the current year to get them a return in the current year. That was a key thing, because I've been that commercial leader before when I'm like, I've got X amount of dollars in my budget for this year. I need to hit my number this year because that's what the board is expecting. And so that was one of my key things is we need to be able to identify things in this process so they can identify some quick wins and implement some actions to get a return in the current year. So that is on the commercial side. As I've launched that and started sharing that with folks, what's realized or what's been communicated to me is like, hey, Brian, we could really use something just like this to get us ready for exit. And so that's what I'm doing right now. Typically, these things on the commercial side, there's 7 pillars and there's a scoring metric that is weighted to give them an aggregate score, but there's also drilled down by each of the pillars. So sales process, compensation, strategic planning, go-to-market strategy, the things you would expect to see. And we're going to be doing the same thing on the exit side so that, firms that are saying, hey, I want to exit in the next 4 years, make sure that they are planning ahead the right way, that they're looking at the right things and building intentionally so they can have that desired exit.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and I did take a peek at it. It's like incredibly granular. And I almost think like it is in a way a scorecard, but I think the way that it's like you kind of operationally execute it, you're interviewing people on the team, you're building out kind of like a robust workup for all of these different elements within each kind of section of this like larger scorecard. So like I almost think like, scorecard's not doing it justice, but because like after seeing it, like it is really, in depth and robust, and like you can tell that it's like informed by you just having done this a lot, what I mean? And knowing what works.
Multiple companies, public and private, multiple indirect and direct sales channels. So we think about all of that, and a lot of this stuff, for anybody listening, it's product agnostic, right? And so everybody, I love the comment of like, oh, well, we're in spine and spine's unique. That doesn't work here. It's like, well, good business fundamentals tend to work in different areas, right? And so that's what it's based on, but it is very specific to a complex sales environment and medtech particularly. Obviously, this would be for commercial stage medtech companies. If somebody is getting ready to launch, probably not going to be as effective for them because certain things aren't going to be applicable.
Yeah.
But if you've got a base of revenue and you're looking to accelerate it, there are things here that will help them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I wanted to talk about kind of the capital markets, and kind of what you're seeing. And I know, I'm working on a write-up for the HSBC kind of full year healthcare venture report that came out. But before we get into kind of like the larger kind of large cap, all deals, IPO market type stuff. I wanted to ask your thoughts on this. I saw, somebody posted on LinkedIn, and it was basically saying, it was like, for if you're raising, I think it was under 20 million or under a 20 million valuation maybe or something, but it was basically for like the earlier stage crowd, right? Series A and types. And it was saying that like, you should, kind of assume, or I forget the vernacular, assume or expect like a structured capital. And it was like convertible preferred. And it was kind of all these different levers, that were obviously pretty much all slanted to like the investor friendly, approach. I think it was like kind of like early dividends, which almost acted like as like a kind of a royalty, if you will, for those early investors. Some different things like that. Obviously, there was like some different rights and things, and I replied in the comment. I was like, are you seeing like founders like lose deals because they're unwilling to like be flexible on terms? Because I feel like a lot of the stuff I'm seeing, it's like they'd love to get to a term sheet, but they're not even getting to that term sheet phase. But like, I guess, and feel free to disagree with me on this, because my experience is by definition anecdotal and only with the people that I talk to and the deals I see. But I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are on like, that pendulum swinging. Are you seeing a ton of structured capital? Are you hearing from like the capital class of like, yeah, they're really only looking for very specific types of deals with certain levers or certain, convertible preferred elements, that kind of stuff? Just curious to get your broad thoughts.
Yeah, I think, for one, I mean, the most critical thing is making sure that you're putting your deal in front of the right people, right? So certain institutional investors will want a company with a certain stage of development. Others will invest in the earlier stuff. And that's one thing that's most critical to know in the beginning is, who do I even need to be talking to? From there, it's how do I position my business in the right light so that I can gain their interest. I think the number one thing that we educate our clients on is it's still a very difficult capital environment. It absolutely has gotten better in 2025. I think we're beyond, this was the year at JP Morgan where everybody was like actually like not speculating that the market was getting better, that we're actually agreeing that the market was getting better.
Yeah.
And now we're continuing to see that post JP Morgan. So 24 was better than 23, not substantially. 25 better than 24. 2025 was better than 24, and 26 has been better so far as well. So that's positive, but it's still not easy to get deals done. We spend time just making sure with our clients that they are prepared to be reasonable when it comes to terms and valuation. And we just share the data, right? So what we'll do a lot is we will comb through PitchBook in their category and we'll say, hey, here's the last 18 months of transactions in your category, and here's the range of what the valuations look like. We should be prepared for things in this range. But I think, so that's one thing. And then I think the other thing that I'll share is, for the earlier companies, you should expect investors that are coming in what is still viewed as a riskier capital environment, you should expect them to seek certain types of preferences. And just be prepared for that and be willing to be reasonable. And again, keep in mind, it's not about, if you're the founder, it's not necessarily about you, accomplishing your dream of what you envision. You likely have shareholders already.
Yeah.
And so now you're acting in the best interest of the shareholder. For us, when we engage, we're acting on behalf of the board. And so we report to the board, and that's how we operate. But yes, to your point, without getting into the weeds of, is it convertible preferred, or what is the instrument? There will be requests for preferences typically. And it's always based on the unique nature of where they are. The other key thing that we see a lot that I'll just share with folks is, if you're going out for your $20 million Series A, let's say you've already got a handful of seed investors and individuals in the business, the first thing that a lot of, institutional investors will ask for like a Series A in this instance is, where are the existing investors in this round? And if you're going to your existing investors and none of them are stepping up, they're going to be like, well, if the ones that already know the business aren't putting more money in, why would I come in blind and give you a check, right? And so these are some of the things that we're working in, and that we, quite frankly, we identify in our diligence process to make sure that once we engage, we're set up with the client to be successful in getting a transaction done.
Absolutely. No, that was great insights. Yeah. And before we get, my last point on that is, and I know this is a, like, the capital markets, right? It's a, pure, supply, demand. There's all of these market forces. It's not like any one person is like, we should make it harder on early stage or this, right? Like, I know this is all very just like market driven, but I do think with, the difficulty of the capital market, and then like, if, the pendulum swings too far to, you just have to accept these, very, very investor friendly, onerous terms, etc. Like we could be, and I kind of think we're there in some respects, but like you're creating this structure to where it almost turns into this like lottery ticket for the founders and stuff, where it's like, hey, unless you sell for 50 million or 100 million, like or more, like you're probably going to make nothing. You know what I mean? And with the capital it takes to get these things to market, and with these different rights and privileges and preferred returns, and when you're just stacking those, right? Like you could have it to where it's like everything goes right, you do hit milestones, maybe you get those tranched, milestone based investments, et cetera, and like for whatever reason you get to 10 million and you got a 40 million acquisition on the table, and like you and the other 3 co-founders walk away with $1 million after 8 years of grinding, and it's like, okay, that was like, how'd that happen? Yeah. Also, like, if you like kind of the risk adjusted, IRR, if you will, like the ROI for them, it's kind of like, I don't know, like I feel like there's a lot of really talented people that are probably like, I could go do the, founder, or maybe I'll like come in as like the CEO, take a big stake, but like, what's really in it for me if basically it's like, 50 million plus exit, or all of this, maybe even working below market rate for a period of time is for naught, right? So I guess it's just like, if you want to keep, I think we have a talented operator problem, right? And so making it still be financially and economically advantageous for really talented people to be operators and, move companies from early to mid to growth stage, and then have these exits, and not make it like that kind of like all or nothing approach. Like I do think that's important, and again, that's not something that you can like manufacture or engineer because it's very market driven, but it just seems like that's maybe a little bit like, it's just not as the risk and the benefit, whatever, I feel like are kind of out of whack right now. But anyways, you may disagree with that, I don't know.
Well, I think you certainly see those examples. Those aren't the ones that the stories that people tell on the golf course. They tell the golf course of the person that had, they put $1 million of their own money in and they had a $200 million return, or something crazy, right? You get the unicorn stories. One thing I'll share, in regards to that, and for the audience, anybody thinking about jumping into something and getting it off the ground as an operator, being a founder. Hearing you share that example, Spencer, I think about just establishing proper governance.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? So for example, one of the things we see is, this technology, and again, I just presented to a group at Penn State's College of Medicine recently about this topic. If you're the inventor of the technology and you don't go with the company, so you invented the technology, you have a relationship with the company, you get a certain stake in the company, but you're not going to be an operator, what percentage of the business should they get if they're not going with the company? And you see some crazy things out there where the inventor wants 30%, and two other operators are like, hey, I'm going to run this. We're going to make so much money. We'll give them 30%. We'll each take 20 or whatever it is, and we're off to the races. And they don't find out until later they get to the exit, like, oh, he actually should have only gotten like 5%.
Yeah.
And that's the mistake we made at the very beginning. And so if you haven't done that and you're thinking about doing it, talk to somebody that's done it, so you can make sure that everybody is kind of set up proportionately the way they should be for the desired return at the end. If everybody at the end, ends up where it just wasn't a successful outcome and we didn't get a great return, then that's just the nature of risk when it comes to these early stage ventures in healthcare.
Yeah.
But again, proper governance can avoid some of these things that are controllable.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. So, and by the way, I've got the HSBC banking, full year, whatever. I've been pulled it up, was just kind of looking at while we were talking. But like, what do you think people should know about or should hear about, or like, what are you seeing that you think people need to be aware of
in the market in general?
Yeah, like with the IPO market, early stage financing, kind of all venture deals, growth stage, et cetera. Like, what are you saying? I know you went to JP Morgan. That was probably a month ago. Kind of just what's the stuff that you're not going to pull out of press releases, right? Like, what's that kind of inside baseball on how the market's, poised to kind of rebound, it sounds like, is your position for the year?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the market's definitely getting better. We're seeing more IPOs in biotech and medtech. That's helpful. The M&A market for both of these sides has been pretty active the last couple of years. But when it's only M&A, we're very limited in how we can get returns to LPs and other investors. The biggest thing I would just share with it, and again, you see it, and I don't know how you can prevent this systemically, but the founder's dilemma of once you create this technology and you see that massive exit in the category and you think, I'm going to get that exit. I just find it so hard for people to be reasonable and objective. But if they can be reasonable and objective and be heads down, leveraging every resource they can to get the capital in the business to grow it, I think, there's certainly a reasonable opportunity for success in the current market environment if the technology warrants it. But be prepared for a long, difficult road.
Mm-hmm.
If you're expecting that you're going to hire somebody like me or go out on your own and raise your round in 2-3 months, like that's not going to happen
Mm-hmm.
unless you already have a term sheet done. I mean, think about it this way, just diligence and documentation could take 3 months, right? And so that's the number one thing I would say for is just plan appropriately, right? And then also, do the work around your budget so that you know what value creation you're going to create from this round. And then think about how much additional runway do I need to prepare for the next round? One of the things that I see that's a fallacy a lot is they're like, oh, well, after I do this round, I'm going to exit or I'm going to get this deal done here. But it's like, well, what if you don't?
Mm-hmm.
And as an investor, if I was the investor in that situation, I'd want to know that here's our plan to raise the next round here, or we're going to do this deal here, or we're going to have 6 months of runway when we go out to do that transaction. That's what investors want to hear in this environment.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. And I think, I probably opine too much on, like the early stage market and how difficult it is just because that's like a lot of the people that I interact with.
No, it is.
They're
It
raising
is.
seed rounds, they're raising Series A. And I just, was looking at this report. It's for the early stage. It was 2023, 110 deals. And so this is seed and Series A, med device. They call it first financing in this report. But
Okay.
2023 was 110 deals. 2024 was 108 deals. 2025 was 94 deals, right? And it went, roughly 700 million, roughly a billion, 900 million. So it's down on dollars a bit, down on deals, which is the opposite for if you look at all venture investment, right? There's been more deals, and I think it was 7.3 billion to 10.4 billion in total capital invested. So that is just a fact of life. Like I saw someone post and it's like, family offices and angel groups are filling the gap. And I was like, what do you mean by filling the gap? And like they gave me a thoughtful answer, but I was like, because I was literally like working on this write up, and I was like, I'm not seeing the gap filling. I'm seeing the gap widening, and less deals and less money coming in to seed and Series A financings. And it's definitely stabilized. Like 2024 was, if you pull out this like massive deal, like top heavy deal, and that kind of, I think it was like a huge Series A. Like it's been pretty stable low, but it's still just it's not. I think it was a 30% jump in the all deals, basically large deals capital invested. But maybe one of my last questions here, if you're raising, a Series A, you're trying to do it the right way, whatever, is there anything that you see as whether it's like, coming with specific structured terms? Is it really focusing on the right investor that you're doing outreach to? Is it the approach that you take with that where, really trying to leverage warm outreach? Maybe it's going to specific conferences or certain ways of kind of meeting them in person and building the trust. Like, what are the things for kind of the Series A, maybe even Series B people, founders, executives, like that they should be thinking about and planning for with the fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I would say, don't even think about terms yet, right? Like, let's get to a point where someone's in diligence and they're ready to negotiate terms, and then think about that. Really,
can I ask? So your ask slide, do you even you recommend them put a valuation on it, or just say like, here's what we're raising, would love to talk about the valuation? Okay, that's news to me. I feel like
exactly. You have to be clear on your ask. We need 30 million, and this is the value creation from that 30 million, and here's the timeline. That's what they need to be focused on. When I see somebody that says, hey, we're raising 30 million at a 50 pre, all it does is create a myriad of questions like, where'd that number come from? How'd you get that number? I don't like that number. I'm out. And they don't even listen to the rest of the story. So what you want is, we want to get people to the table that are the right investors to add to the cap table, that can add value, hopefully not just from a check standpoint, but strategically as well. There's a lot of groups out there that can do that. And those are the ones you want to bring on your cap table, because they're likely, going to want to see it on your board of directors as well. And I have a firm rule for my clients. If somebody doesn't add strategic value on the board, they shouldn't be on the board. So that's one thing that,
Yeah. So you get to that ask site, you say, hey, we're raising we're raising 10 million and we think the value creation is going to be X and here's what we're going to do with the money. And then invariably that investor's going to say, okay, well, what's the valuation? Like, what are the terms? You recommend that they say,
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a good question. So if you get to that point, they've already been in diligence. You
no,
know,
this,
if you
in my head, sorry to interrupt. In my head, like this may be first or second pitch where like you get to the asks,
no,
right? And you do have to say like, hey, we're raising this amount of capital, but like I guess maybe the answer there is then like you say like, hey, if we would love to talk about that in diligence, we want to make sure that like there is alignment on our mission, this technology, our team, and the interest is there, and then like would love to talk about that more in a separate in a follow-up meeting. Is that the
bingo,
okay?
bingo. For me, like it's a waste of time to talk about valuation unless you have somebody that's ready to write a check
Yeah,
because they still need to do all that diligence. Like there's a million things to talk about before you even get there. And most of the institutional capital, you're not gonna see that until the time comes up. Every now and then they'll pressure test just to make sure that like you're within the range of what is reasonable. But that's not the problem right now. And at least for me, like I educate my clients on what the range looks like in the market, and it's not based on what I think or what I saw from one or two deals. We pulled the data, and
yeah,
this is what happened in the market over the last year for Series A and biotech over the last 18 months. It's not 20% of the company getting sold; it's 30 to 60% of the company being sold. So if we're doing a $30 million Series A, based on that math, here's the range, right? And so that way you can just kind of set expectations with the board, which is what we do early so that they know. But then it's really about, going out there and making sure that you've got your messaging tight. You see a lot of decks that are like 40 slides long. There's a million too many words in there. And like, and again, think about if you're an investor and you're getting inundated with all of these, like coaching your client on how to get to the point quickly and hit that value creation message, it takes time. And frankly, even the ones that are really good at it, you should constantly get better on it as you pitch.
yeah,
But you mentioned AI tools. This is a great way to use AI tools. We're doing it with a client right now. Every handful of calls that we do with investors, we'll upload the recording and have it spit out. It'll audit the call to us and say, here's the things you did well. Here are the things that you need to do a better job of. And we've done that. And we've constantly refined the pitch deck. The pitch deck will never be done for
yeah, yeah,
anybody. You will
yeah.
constantly be refining the pitch deck. Just accept that. But if you can get the messaging and get the messaging right and let the data speak for itself, then you can typically be successful.
Yeah, I agree, and it's refreshing to hear someone that I like really respect kind of say some of these things because they're especially on like the angel groups and angel side, and then like you still see this a lot with like even some family offices and some VCs like they'll like I don't want to pick on the angel groups, but like they'll be like they want to do the exercise of the financial analyst and they'll be like, what's the IRR? What's your valuation going to be? Whatever. And like, it's just the wrong conversation to be having in that first, second meeting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but they like really want to go there. And like, I know, I even know one angel group where it's like, before you even get to the diligence and the pitches, like you have to like agree to the terms in the term sheet and the valuation. And it's like, going through that, I was like, this is so backwards. I was like, why? Like, you don't even know the value of the technology in a due diligence fashion yet, and you're trying to like assign a valuation, and it just seems like this kind of like academic cosplay finance exercise that they want to go to.
Yeah.
When the real way to do it is like, are we interested in? Do we believe the team and trust them? Are we interested in the technology? Do we agree with their thesis and believe in their ability to execute? Like, all of those things are first order volitions in my mind. And then like the valuation
Agreed.
you'll be able to get to, you know what I mean?
Agreed.
So anyway, sorry
Agreed.
to rant there for a little bit, but
No, that's great. You nailed it.
it's really refreshing. So I'll turn it over to you here to kind of close this out, but like anything, shout outs you want to give, things you want to plug, updates, upcoming events you're going to, if people, want to find you there, et cetera, like kind of floor is yours, anything you want here.
Yeah, first of all, Spencer, thank you for the time. Great discussion. And, for anybody that's listening that wants to reach out to me, you can find my website. You can find me on LinkedIn. Email is brian@carlislestrategic.com. If you have a, commercial stage, medtech asset and you're looking to accelerate growth, love to have a discussion about that. If you've got, some major value creation that's upcoming and you need to raise capital for it, or prepare for exit. Would love to talk about that as well. I'll just reinforce, my strong partnership with Blackpoint Capital, fantastic asset management firm with 10 billion in assets under management. I've got them with me as my partner in a lot of these transactions. And, with 10 billion in assets, you bring a lot of resources to the table as well. And so, I think we talked about a lot, so I don't need to share too much more, but I'm always open to a discussion if somebody's got a problem they're trying to solve. And if they heard something in this discussion and would like to follow up, I'm happy to connect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just wanted to say too, like I meet a lot of people, I have a lot of people on the pod, whatever, and this is kind of me speaking to the audience here. Brian is, I would say, like has a unique set of kind of Liam Neeson, like I have a very, specific set of skills. He's got a really, really interesting, diverse set of skills, also resources, and I think the relationship side as well, and kind of the capabilities that you offer from kind of personally, but like through, Carlisle Strategic Partners. So like highly recommend reach out to him if it seems like it's a good fit. You just want to explore, kind of how he could help your organization. You will not regret it. I promise that. And we will put in the show notes, Brian, like all of the kind of info and details that you went through so people can reach out to you, find you, follow him on LinkedIn, all that jazz. But yeah, Brian, like had a blast. We could have done this for a lot longer. Yep. Really, really fun. Thank you for coming on. And for everybody that stuck around for the full episode, I know you got a ton out of this just like I did. So and Brian, thanks again.
Thank you, Spencer.
Yep. Appreciate take care, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.